Hello! Welcome to the third episode of the Two Existential Dudes podcast. I'm Luke,
And I'm Andrew.
and today our discussion will be about maturity and how that really isn't the same as getting older. Too often the two are conflated, and today we're going to talk a little about that.
It's always important to start with your definitions. So first of all, how can we separate these two?
Well, I'd say maturity is definitely a deliberate choice that you make that as opposed to getting older, which is something that happens, as you were telling me before, of regardless of the choices you make. Like getting older is a inevitability of being human.
Yeah, humans naturally just grow older. That's how everything works in human life and animal life and really just everything in the world. But to become fully mature, and a term that we'll have to define in and of itself, to get to that state, it's a much more of it's not an automatic system. It's something you really have to work into, and you have to be cognizant about the entire time.
Yeah. So the first sort of, I guess, definition you could use for maturing, or it's really a requirement that's paramount to maturing. It's accepting responsibility for yourself. This can include everything from financial responsibility, educational, spiritual, physical, emotional, professional, intellectual, and probably above all, behavioral.
Mm-hmm.
So, for those who refuse to take responsibility for their education or profession, often struggle financially, leading to dependence on their parents or perhaps a future spouse,
Mm-hmm.
or in some cases even the government.
Absolutely, yeah. Everyone, it's a very often trope that everyone just associates childishness with younger persons, and almost every one of us knows that this is entirely false. There are I know plenty of 70-year-olds, 80-year-olds who are absolute children, and well, they're absolutely immature, I should say. And then I know many 15, 20-year-olds who are exponentially or magnitudes more mature than those people. So I definitely don't think it's first of all, it can happen at different points in your life, and it definitely isn't just as you get older, you'll get more mature. It can happen whenever you put in the work to it.
Certainly.
And like you said, all those different qualifiers are what lead someone to being mature. And I've seen members of our own school who face issues with their own family and have to develop in maturity to be able to take care of themselves, be able to take care of their education, perhaps even their food and their housing in some cases, to be more extreme. But those people are then much more, I would say, mature in that they have developed these, I suppose you could say, adult-like qualities that shows independence and intelligent cognition.
Yeah, it can be tough for those people that are sort of forced into maturity through no fault of their own, but you can tell those are usually the people that come out stronger as a result of that.
Yeah, in something like a broken home where you face two separated parents or perhaps an abusive parent, the child is often the person who has to mature the most because they witness all of that and they have to figure out how to take care of themselves. And going back to the whole notion of that maturing it's something you have to be willing to do. You can get two different kinds of people out of that. You can get a child who grows up, learns how to take care of themselves and understand the issues in their family and how to not to reproduce them, and becomes a successful adult and a wise person that many people respect. But then there's the other person who won't. They will not accept that condition. They won't accept the responsibility, if you will, to grow themselves, and they face just toil after toil, and they don't grow at all, and they stay in their shell, and often that leads to some disastrous consequences for that person.
Yeah, that's a decision that, regardless of your background, that's really something we all have to consciously decide to do. And often those those broken homes can, and those children that grow up in those tough circumstances, in some cases, and this is not always, because sometimes unfortunate things happen to people, but in some cases it's a result of people in that child's life who refuse to mature themselves. So you're sort of being raised by someone that hasn't reached that yet, and
Absolutely.
that makes it supremely difficult.
Yeah, more often than not, the issues you see between adults are, if you've taken the time to really consider the actual issue instead of just fighting out of the gate, you might realize that it's some childish, immature issue, like I don't know, like she said something behind my back and I took it extremely harshly, which, first of all, saying it behind someone's back is an immature thing to do. But in addition, that reaction would also be immature, and two wrongs never make a right. They're not like
No.
negatives and positives. They don't work that way. If anything, it just magnitudes the issue worse. So more often than not, those clashes, if they're not arguments and they're rather fights, you just get something that's pointless, immature, and a waste of time, really.
I think that's sort of a good segue to the next point I have to make about taking responsibility, and that being an aspect of maturity. And it's that those who refuse to set strong morals, values, and principles, or don't take the responsibility of living up to them, often suffer in personal relationships and their own behavior as well. That's where you see. That's again where some of those abusive relationships can start, and people that don't really know how to be in a relationship or how to treat people with respect.
Yeah, tying all the way back to our first episode. Well, not that long ago, only 3 weeks now.
All the way.
All the way back. It's a very magnitudes of decades. Anyways, tying back to that, the whole notion again of introspection. If you don't understand yourself, who are you to, one, judge other people, guide other people, or really have any significant relationship with anyone else? And that especially matters for being mature, in that if you're not at all, if you're never mature towards someone and demonstrate, dare I say, professionalism with them, they will never be comfortable around you.
Yeah.
They never will, and they'll never open up to you, and you'll never have you might have a relationship, sure, but you won't have a genuine, heartfelt, time-built, garnered connection.
I think the morals and values of that are particularly useful because if you think about like the stereotypical 20-year-old that's immature and partying and all the other stuff that goes along with that, you really don't see a strong sense of values there, and that goes back to character, which we always come back to, but it's really important in this scenario.
Absolutely. Both my brother and sister have now gone through college. My brother just moved out to Arizona for his doctorate, or master's degree rather, and they're college kids, so they did stupid things, of course. They went to parties, they hang out with people, probably a couple things we shouldn't talk about, but that's fine. Normally, I wouldn't respect that, but then there's a double-sided edge to that. I noticed that both of them have incredibly mature attitudes towards the world they live in, and it's honestly very impressive to see that, and it's very heartwarming to see that stereotype broken, because while yes, some of those things I don't agree with, one, they do them safely, and two, they do them with maturity and understanding of what the risks are, which makes me more open to not accepting, but at least tolerating that.
Yeah. The next one I have on here is emotional responsibility, which is kind of a vague concept, but as I have here, those who allow themselves to become emotionally weak, disconnected, or hypersensitive can develop severe depression, anxiety, trust issues, or sociopathy.
That's a great sentence. I love it. But it's true. It's very true. If you don't understand your own emotional state,
Yeah.
you're more likely to develop in ways that you don't intend.
Yeah, it does go back to really understanding yourself. And I'm not saying like have a heart of stone and don't feel anything emotionally, but you do really it's almost more being in touch with your emotions and knowing how to control them and use them for the better.
Yeah.
Because
Go ahead.
sorry.
No, go ahead.
Another thing that can happen is emotional dependence, which, similar to financial dependence, it can result in exploitation or crisis in the case that which you're dependent on is taken away from you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very true. Now that we've kind of gotten a lot of this discussion of what is maturity, I would ask, what is the purpose of maturing instead of just growing old?
Well,
You probably have something written down in that novel.
The novel I've got here. Well, I'd say a very good that does lead very well into something I wrote.
Excellent.
It's that maturity on a basic level is the transformation of the potential into the actual, which is a somewhat fancy way of saying
It's a thesis sentence there.
when you are youthful, you have a lot of potential. You could go in any number of directions with your life. You could accomplish any number of things. And a lot of people who sort of refuse to grow up, they hold on to that potential and refuse to make something out of it because potential is something we don't like to give up.
Yeah, that's very true. And there's almost this sense of wasting potential.
Mm-hmm.
And there's all the different things of like how to be successful, and the whole thing with for every success you have, there's at least 10 faults. And I think that's definitely true, especially in a case in which you're dealing with your own psyche, in that whatever steps you take will never be the perfect one.
Mm-hmm.
One, they'll still develop with time, but two, you'll more often than not fail and just create an inner struggle within yourself because you don't understand that, and perhaps like an imposter syndrome and struggling to understand your own self.
Mm-hmm.
But what I would say to that is incredibly important. In the same way that starting a business, you have to have those failures to know what you did wrong and how you can grow from them. It's the same exact thing. You have a failure in your life, recognize what you did wrong, figure it out, apologize if necessary.
Yeah.
And then get to work again.
So what I kind of got from that was you're not always going to step in the right direction, but it's a whole lot better than staying where you are and not going anywhere, because at least then you can recognize where you're going and sort of get yourself on the right path or constantly course correct so that you're getting closer towards maturity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the only issue with that is if you aren't recognizing the faults and you're just moving aimlessly, because then you might go down a path of mild success, but you won't see a path of high success, and you're much more likely to see a path of struggle and family issues and no growth at all, if not worsening inside of you.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a more extreme notion, but it's definitely something to be wary of when you're going on that hubris, if you will.
Good one.
Odyssey, that's what it is. Not hubris. Hubris is the other one. There we go.
So I'd like to go to one aspect of the potential transforming into the actual that's particularly relevant to right now. Mm-hmm. Since we all have so much time, that's potential. Like time essentially is the purest form of potential, because you can make it into pretty much whatever you want it to be.
Absolutely.
And people really have to force themselves to be productive with their time. And that can come in a lot of forms. That can come in the form of a job, that can come in the form of hobbies, but there are certainly a lot of destructive, or at the very least,
Unhelpful.
yeah, it can come in a lot of those forms too. So you have to really be conscious of how you're using that time that you have.
Yeah, and definitely, I don't want to like you pointed out. I don't want to restrict that to like you have to do this to get better at
Yeah.
something. You might have certain steps you need to do to improve a certain aspect of your life. Going back to when we talked about improving instrumental skills, you have to practice more to do that. Okay, that's a clear connection there. But working a job, self-reflection, reading a book, all of that stuff is something that takes your time and transfers it into something that's, if not valuable, either makes you money, just trading your time for that money.
Which is valuable.
Yeah, which is, I suppose you could put as valuable. Or at least is something to do to keep you from slothing around.
Yeah.
And that, especially right now, is incredibly important because if the longer you sit, the more you... I'll use the word dwell on thoughts rather than think, because, and this is a possible discussion for later, but to think is to consider an argument and to figure out what you should do. To dwell is to consider all the faults of an argument and make yourself mad. And especially right now, we've seen it with all these, with a lot of political unrest and a lot of different issues within the United States. A lot of people have simply dwelled on those issues, which you do need to consider them, but so few people have stopped to consider and think about what they should do.
Yeah. I think this is something I particularly struggle with, where, and I guess a lot of people, how often do people say, like, well, if only I had more time, I would do this, I would get this done. They're thinking about the potential that they have with that time as opposed to trying to get things done. And even with myself, I think about a lot of things that I want to do. I want to get this done. I want to learn a new skill or something, and you really just have to force yourself to go after it. And again, you can course correct. Like maybe you try something and that wasn't the thing for you, but that's where the thinking comes in.
Yeah, you have to think about what you want and how you might achieve that, because you can think for days that, like, I want to know how to make the world's best steak. You can't do that. I mean, sure, you could practice how to make the world's best steak every day, but, yeah, even that example I just set there has a very clear progression to it. You can't just set yourself to do this thing. You have to have that progression. And that's it takes a lot of patience and maturity to recognize how long it will take, and that you need to be consistent in it and have patience, and then eventually you'll get to where you want to go.
And you can't just think about making the world's best steak. You can't just research. I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of research out there and Pinterest articles about how to make the best steak, but if you're not actively making steak, then you're never going to achieve something like that.
Everyone knows how to save the world until they're asked to do it. And it's saving the bees. That's how you do it. That's a very clear answer, guys.
Someone should write that down.
Save the bees. Hashtag save the bees.
The next one I have, I guess this might be a tad bit controversial, but it is the value of long-term relationships over, I guess you could say, hookups or flings.
Oh, I see what you mean now. Okay.
Yeah. And
this will be fun.
Because you're really burning through that potential when you're not striving for a long-term relationship. Like when you meet someone and say that person could be someone that you have a valuable, fulfilling relationship with, but instead you take the quick and easy route and the dark side. Sorry. And just hook up or something like that.
Yeah, more often than not, the notion of just a hookup, or perhaps you could, to use the vulgar phrase, the one night stand, is just an I need this now, as either it's been too long since I've been in a relationship, or I need some form of satisfaction to make up for my daily life. And well, there's a lot to unpack there already.
There's a lot there.
So first of all, if you're having a struggle in your daily life, short, immediate satisfaction, sure, it'll help you. But it's the same thing as having one chocolate bar. It'll taste great for 30 minutes, and then you'll probably regret it the next day. Especially if you're trying to get on a healthier diet, which you could. I'm not going to make that connection at all. But but it applies in the same way, that you have to have that patience to really find the relationship you're trying to develop, and the simple short-term satisfaction is just that. It's short-term satisfaction that only applies to that tiny bit of your life, and maybe makes you feel a little bit better, but more often than not will make you feel guilty for what you've done. For some people, and the people who want to become more mature and want to develop themselves, those are the people that'll feel guilty for it. And to that, I would say simply, yes, it may be difficult to find a complementary relationship, but it's not worth your time to just throw yourself into that, especially without maturity or patience, because all you're going to get is a fiery and passionate relationship that might last 3 months, such as every high school relationship ever.
I think that's I was going to go into this later, but I think it fits really well here now. It's that those who are mature will pursue what is meaningful and fulfilling in the long term, as opposed to what is expedient and immediately gratifying. And in a way, I think you could make the argument that immaturity focuses very much on the short term. Like, think of a child, for example. Like, if they were to make every decision, they wouldn't think past 5 minutes from now. They want everything now. They don't care what's good for them in 5 years. You get what I'm saying.
Yeah, a kid wants a lollipop. A kid doesn't want $20,000 in college education. I've seen numerous studies of that, where it's like, here's a I forget what it was, but it was like, here's a credit card with the X amount of money on it, and then here's a lollipop. And almost every child went for the lollipop because it's an immediate thing. Even though there was clearly a lot more up for them on that credit card, they went for that because it's what's, one, in their sight line, and two, readily available. And that is, like you were kind of alluding to, that is another primary difference between maturing and growing old. Because someone who's just grown old can still have those childhood indulgences and little restraint and the now immediacy of it, and wanting to get everything right away and how they want it. These are the people that eat comfort foods all the time. And these are the people that don't read an article more than 20 words.
Yeah.
And to be fully mature is to, I don't want to say you have to cut that stuff out of your life. Sure, you can enjoy short-term stuff. Sure, it's fun little things to make up for the long-term patience you have. But it's just that. They're making up for that. I'm doing this. It's going to take 20 years to get here.
Yeah. If you're using those things as a replacement for the long term, then you're doing something wrong.
Absolutely. You need to have that. Yes, they may be a nice little thing now, but this is what I'm heading for in the end.
I wanted to get your opinion on something, because I think the one thing that contradicts the notion of maturity being the transforming of the potential into something actual is money. Because I think most people would agree that saving money, saving that potential, is the more mature thing than spending it
Yeah.
completely lost the word there.
Yeah, I mean, for an example, look no further than a tax return.
Yeah.
Most people get, well, I don't know how much.
How many of our viewers have seen a tax return?
Okay, so for those of you that might not know, a tax return, throughout the year, you pay taxes to the government, of course, and then when tax season comes around, you file your paperwork, and you put in your deductions, blah, 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 lots of math that I don't really understand, but I have a very vague grasp on it. And sometime around April, you'll get some form of, quote, tax return, which is the money you pay to the government that they owe to you because you paid too much in taxes. And for most people, this is between $200 to like $2,000. On average, it can go either way as well, especially for larger corporations. But most people, while some people use that money to invest in something like a washer or a dryer, a lot of people like just take that short-term money and put it into something immediate.
Yeah.
And I use the word invest into something like a car or a dryer, or just you could even put it into like the stocks if you're into that kind of thing. But it's something that you have to have that patience to it and recognize that, like, yes, I have X amount of money now and it's more than I normally get in my paycheck, but if I spend it all now, I just wasted it, really.
Yeah. So money would really go into that comparison between immediacy and patience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the best juxtaposition you could put there is someone using their tax return to buy, again, like a car or washer or dryer, something that'll last a long time, or going out to a nice dinner. Which, that form of indulgence can, again, have benefit to it in that it's like, sure, this is a yearly reward we have. Okay, sure. But I think to use all of it on that might be too far.
Yeah.
Because then you're getting into, this is my lifetime reward for all of this I did, instead of a short-term reward you could even present it as like, here's a small reward while we put the rest of it away and save it.
Okay. So, as we've discussed, the people wanting to hold on to their potential, that is immature, but in a way it's not logical anyway, because your potential will expire regardless of whether or not you use it. And this is where getting older comes in. There are plenty of ways where as you get older, you deplete your potential even if it's not aiding you in some way.
Absolutely.
Like this could fall into the category of like looks will fade with age. And with that, let's be honest, your dating prospects.
Yeah, and many older people commonly use the phrase travel while you're young, because in the same way that your potential diminishes with time, or your available potential diminishes with time, when you get to that older state, you can't travel as much. So it's, again, like that, the youth and the abilities diminish with time in the same way. And I think those two are related, because a lot of that is a lot of your potential is how willing you are to do something and how much energy you have available to put into something, which is why college students often try to get a lot of things done, which can be too much sometimes, and is an argument in and of itself. But you'll see college students doing, just not good or bad, but just doing more things than an 80-year-old person will probably do.
Yeah.
For the year.
And just solely based on your age, you can put up with more of that. Even in terms of how you're used to living. Like a college student is much more used to living in a dorm room than, say, a 40-year-old person is. Like as you get older, you expect to have more luxuries as opposed to someone, and that makes sacrificing those to maybe go after something and reach your potential becomes far more difficult as you get older.
Yeah, and that's the hardest part of really applying the potential you have, is you risk something material more often than not. Material meaning also your time.
Yeah, time.
So say your potential is you're a really good driver and you want to be a race car driver. Well, you have to sacrifice a lot of money to do that and a lot of time to do that. And that's something that if you're not very confident or like know it's your calling, so to speak, it can be a dangerous risk for a lot of people. Yeah. And that's a very simple and perhaps extreme example, but it still applies to all of it.
I think this applies to your physical ability as well. Really maybe more than anything, because your physical ability will fade with age, but the more you use it, the longer you can make it last. So it's almost a positive feedback loop where the more you push your body, the more it will give you in return in the future.
Yeah, I know the highest professional world violinists, like all the concert masters who sit at the front of the orchestra and typically referred to as the best one in the orchestra, they obviously spend decades doing that, but they don't get to that profession, especially in something like the Berlin Philharmonic or the New York, which are some of the biggest in the world. They don't get to that position until they're probably 40, sometimes 50, and they stay there till they're probably 70.
Yeah.
Actually, I know the Cincinnati Orchestra. I think it was Cincinnati, but the concert master of that only retired because he had a loss of hearing. From sitting in front of an orchestra for 40 years. Yeah. And that's definitely something is like, because he or she spent so much time developing their technique and working on how they can be a successful musician, both technically and mentally, it allowed them to last longer in the profession when compared with someone who started much later and has a shorter time to it.
That's good. Okay, so I think this is kind of a brief intermission because I want to move on to a slightly more controversial topic.
Oh boy. We need intermission music. I'll work on that.
So if talk regarding politics of any kind will offend any viewers, now is the time to...
And let me preface this in that we are going to try to be as unbiased as possible and with as little...
Yeah, we're coming after everyone.
Yeah, we're just gonna... yeah, we're being very indiscreet and just going after everyone, so... But we're going to make generalizations, so if you fear that, this is your chance.
Okay, politics and responsibilities. So should we start with the political right or the political left?
Eeny, miny, mo.
I have the right written first on here.
Let's go with that.
Let's go with that. So often on the more conservative or libertarian side of things, people are very hyper focused on their rights and their freedoms, and those things are important, but they're really only as valuable as what people use them for. Mm-hmm. So freedoms can just as easily include things that are destructive, hateful, abusive, or even useless.
Yeah.
In some ways. So to that I would say everyone must teach themselves to use those they need to use those and sort of see it as a responsibility as much as it is a right or freedom, and that they can then use those while viewing it through the lens of responsibility to better their own life and others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and as we'll see, which will also apply to the other side of the spectrum, there's so much right kind of thing. Mm-hmm. There's very little responsibility in the discussion at all. And that is just as important. I think if you went up to the average American, regardless of position, most of them could tell you what a lot of their rights are. Mm-hmm. But I don't think very many of them could tell you what their constitutional responsibilities are. Mm-hmm. Such being voting, being an educated voter, being a good citizen, law-abiding, that kind of stuff. Which so many people, some might be innate virtues, but a lot of people forget they should be doing that, especially voting.
And those are just the more constitutional responsibilities that people have. I would say there's an even more fundamental set of responsibilities that we have just as human beings. Those are, I would say, treating others with respect would be a big one. I'd say doing what you can for your family and your community, and family's kind of a touchy thing.
Yeah.
But it does go back to finding a valuable, strong, long-term relationship, because not only does that affect you and your partner, but it also affects any children or any family, anyone in the family that's
Indeed
there. So those are all responsibilities that we all need to take upon ourselves. Now to the liberal or progressive side of things. And I think often on this side, personal responsibility is almost pushed aside sometimes, instead opting to fix the system. It's seen more as the problem is this big looming thing over everyone's head, and it's not my fault, it's not my family's fault, it's
society's fault.
Yeah, society. That's a good way of putting it.
Yeah, and this especially, you can tie that all the way back to Roosevelt's FDR's New Deal of the Great Depression in the 1930s. All of that, the first time the government really provided some form of assistance to the American population. And while that may or may not be helpful and may or may not be a good thing or a bad thing, however you want to put it, won't argue that here, it definitely gradually develops a society of expectations. The whole ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country has very much been reversed.
Yeah.
Whether or not we like that. And that connects all the way back to the start of this discussion, living in a family where you don't grow it all yourself and you expect everything from your family. It's very much a pampered life, and you just expect that out of the gate. And it's something that will set yourself up for failure once that is taken away, especially.
So I think I have to preface that there are certain systems that certainly need to be looked at in any society and potentially reformed, or whatever you would call it. But I would say it's almost impossible for someone who can't take responsibility for themselves to be able to do that effectively, because if you can't take personal responsibility, or you don't believe that others are capable of doing that and you don't expect them to, how can you ever expect to fix something as complex as a governmental system or a societal issue?
Yeah, again, if you don't understand yourself, what gives you the right to challenge anything? It's very simple. If you're not a stable human being, an intelligent human being, why should anyone respect you, or two, listen to anything you have to say? They shouldn't. And this is something usually we're taught as children: respect your elders. I think this is just stupid, because respect your elders not for their age, but for their wisdom, their experiences, and their successes, and their virtues, not just their age. Because if you give them just the age, then you'll respect Adolf Hitler, which obviously don't, because he might have had wisdom, he might have had experiences, he might have had successes, sure, in military, but his virtues were fundamentally, perhaps dare I say, evil. Well, I don't need to dare I say. They were evil, definitely. And that's something I feel perhaps is often argued in this expectation as you get older, that, well, I'm older now, you should respect me. And this applies to high school seniors, to freshmen, 80-year-olds to 20-year-olds, everything really. In this weird, you should respect me because I'm older no, I respect you if you have wisdom, experiences, success, and virtue.
Absolutely. That's a really good point to keep in mind. Stepping away from politics now.
Welcome back to those of you who left.
Everyone, take a deep breath.
We didn't say anything illegal, so it's fine.
This is more in the territory of philosophy, but I would say people that are more deterministic in nature and in some cases deny free will, the idea that humans have free will, which is a topic, which is a somewhat controversial topic in the last decade or so. You can't even expect anyone to have any responsibility if they're just a collection of synapses firing in their head that cause them to do things in the world.
Yeah. And to go with the argument of everything is determined by a greater power, to run with that, yes, it may be predetermined, but I don't think the way to do that is to expect things to happen. Because even still, you still have to put in work in school. You still have to get a job. Still have to go to that job. Even if you're believing that whatever you do is predetermined, you still have to do things. You can't just sit around. Nothing will happen.
That's an interesting one, because I sort of touched on the sort of hyper atheists who believe that everything is just matter and all human actions can be explained.
Right.
Can be explained that way, but it could in a way apply to certain aspects of religion. People might want to leave again.
oh boy, here we go.
But I guess in some cases, people, like, if things aren't going well in someone's life and they're a religious person, they'll like, why isn't God answering me? Why isn't he making my life better? But that's not really how God's supposed to work.
Yeah, the purpose to go with the pragmatic view of religion entirely from the how do I phrase this? To put it as like, okay, let me start over. To look at the pragmatic view of religion, to anything God does shouldn't be an expectation from you again. It should be, instead of finding help, it should be finding solace, if that makes sense. So in help
define.
Yeah, help here I refer to as like physical unhuman intervention, as in like you win the lottery or some person decides to give you an opportunity that you would never have expected, while solace I refer to as finding guidance.
Yeah.
And that's a very important difference, because a lot of people, like you said, just blame and ask for, like, one, why aren't you helping me, and two, how, like, do something, instead of why have you put this on me and how can I fix it? Like, what can I do to develop myself? Again, that's the difference between growing old and maturing, in that growing old is that just by itself is that expecting like, oh darn, my whole life has been this way, it's all God's fault per se. While maturing is the notion of, okay, I recognize struggles in my life, I'm going to speak to someone or ask someone I respect mightily for guidance.
I think we've stumbled upon a good segue to sort of the last thing I have on here. And going with religion for a second, there's been societies throughout history that when something happened, they always thought to themselves, we must have done something to anger God. And I wouldn't say we should go that far in blaming ourselves for things, but I do want to make the point with this that a mature person will always look at a situation through an introspective lens, and that comes in the form of them asking, what could I have done better for this situation to be different?
Mm-hmm.
What can I do to improve myself in the future? What can I learn from this is a big one. And the immature person will primarily notice external flaws and faults in others.
Mm-hmm.
Like that person must have done something to cause this, or I guess the system. It sort of ties all back together.
Yeah, I think that's a really great way of summarizing what defines a mature person, is that the introspection element of it, which I think we'll be tying back to for the entire length of this podcast. But I had something. It's gone now.
Oh.
Yes, even in the situation where it is like very clearly someone else's fault, the introspective person will deliberately look at what they did and how they affected that other person to make them believe that. So this meaning that, like, basically saying, like, okay, Jimmy here tripped me during football practice and it hurt me.
Mm-hmm.
It's his fault. Yes, but a mature person would look at themselves and be like, okay, what made Jimmy do that? And in some cases might just have been an accident, sure, or he might have just been a bad person.
Mm-hmm.
But a true introspective person might realize that, like, I was being kind of rude to him. Perhaps he was angry with me. And that's again, tying all the way back, is this whole notion of recognizing the faults in yourself and seeing what other people want to be themselves. Not necessarily just calling out their faults, but recognizing them and seeing if you're affecting them in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's what really makes someone a mature individual who understands the world they live in. They understand how the people around them consider them and how they affect those same people. And they understand how every action they take creates a butterfly effect into the world.
Mm-hmm. And I really want to make sure to preface that I don't mean, when I'm saying you need to look at yourself after everything, I'm not saying that it's always your fault or you always need to, like, for lack of a better term, don't tyrannize yourself in that way. Don't become your own. Don't become what someone would do to another person. Like, don't hate yourself, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of this is more directed at the person who doesn't realize it at all.
Yeah.
Because the person who's already reflecting a lot is going to be very tough on themselves. That's how that works. I face that. I think you face that as well. It's a very high bar to fight with, and it can get worse if you blame everything on yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So again, like with most things, it's never this or that. It's a balance in between that you need to find that, okay, this is how I need to grow and this is the issues I'm causing. While at the same time, it's like, okay, here are some of the things I can't change and some of the ways people just regard me that I can't change. And again, that's important in recognizing that if you can't affect it, it's not worth your struggle. Especially if it's someone who's just mean to you for the sake of being mean to you. If you can't affect that, don't go around them. Don't even try and change it.
Yeah.
I mean, you can try the kill it with kindness thing, but it'll take a very long time to make that effective.
So I guess we've kind of laid out the theoretical aspects of maturity and, like, what it means to be mature. So, and we have touched a little on how to make that happen, but is there anything you have to add about how someone could go about maturing themselves, especially, like, take a theoretical high schooler?
In my own experience, it was a lot of reading literature, both academic, those textbooks, I love them. I don't know why, I'm a sick person. Both academic and fiction, in that just someone who's grown old has gone through their whole life and probably never read a lot of that stuff, while someone who's mature, regardless of their age, is someone who in my mind, it at least knows a lot of things and knows how to apply them in a lot of ways. And I think in addition to the whole respecting issues or understanding issues within yourself and how you need to grow from them, the easiest way to get into that is just to broaden your intellect, I think. For me, it was reading precisely a lot of United States history and a lot of music theory. Two things I can apply really well and recognize changes in time and how the themes that go along with those two subjects both intertwine and connect to things I do every day and how they can help me grow as a person. This may not be the solution for everyone. It might be just a case of like considering your own attitude right out of the gate and thinking about how you treat your own friends. If you're a much more extroverted, even though I hate the term, person.
Eccentric.
We'll go with that, eccentric. If that's your way of going about things, it might be better for you to look at your friends and see, okay, what circle am I surrounding myself with and how do I affect them again?
I think that's all I have.
Yes. Do we want to open up the chat for if there's any questions today?
No questions right now. But we can wait a minute.
Thank you, Mr. Editor.
We might try and eventually have call-ins.
Yeah, I think we're gonna do some call-ins on a couple episodes.
I've had a request or two for people calling in, and I think that would be interesting. And we might look at potential guests in the future as well. And certainly, we'd always be open to criticism.
Yeah, as always, if you have comments, compliments, or just constructive criticism, feel free to throw it into the chat. We will either sustain them or completely ignore them, but we'll read them.
It doesn't have to be constructive.
Yeah, that's true. If you don't like the way our voices sound, sorry. I tried for 16 years, so we're
yeah, we hate them too.
This is where we are, yeah.
I think that's all I have.
Yeah, and with that, thank you for listening to the Two Existential Dudes podcast, and have a great day.